So good.
Well done, everybody.
So we got 5 minutes. That's how it looks to me.
This meeting to order the workshop for responding to climate change and increasing community resilience board workshop together. So first, let's do just a quick round of introductions, and then I'll just share more about this this workshop and hand it off to our presenters. So I'll start. Mai Chong-Zhang, Commissioner for District 6.
Trista Madison. Oh, skipped you. County Manager O'Connor is so excited. Go for it.
She got it. County Manager Ryan O'Connor.
Trista Mortensen, District 3.
Matthew Phillips, Climate Health Planner for Ramsey County.
Patrick Howell, Institute for Building Technology and Safety.
Kathy Hadeen, Deputy County Manager, Health and Wellness Service Team.
Commissioner Nicole Fretham, Ramsey County District 1.
Victoria Reinhardt, Ramsey County Commissioner, District 7, and also with NACO, with the National Association of Counties. The IBTS is a is it sponsor? I can't remember. Anyhow, a member that has a board and the board, NACO appoints someone to that board. I am that person, and I currently serve as chair of the IBTS board.
Cool.
That took me a while to get out.
That's okay. That's great.
And Rena Moran, District 4, Ramsey County Commissioner.
Okay. Director Howell. We're doing intros.
Good morning again, Sarah Howley, Director of Public Health.
Good morning, Alita Frank, Interim Environmental Health Division Manager.
Mary Tabach, Environmental Health.
Okay.
Patrick Mendoza, Planning Specialist with the Rapid Responses Initiative. Whitney Moore, Planning Specialist as well.
Christine Vanguard, Planning Specialist. Jeff Hamrick, the Integrated Health and Justice Administrator.
Rosalind Day, Director of Communications and Operations.
Casey Yang, Acting Chief Clerk, County Manager's Office.
Awesome.
Hi, Jennifer Alert, Director of Government Relations.
With the face mask on?
I'm Diane Moran, Bruce.
Melissa Finnegan, Government Relations, Ramsey County.
And Carissa Dillon, Health and Wellness, Planning Manager for District 20.
Can we round back?
And then Lydia.
Oh.
Good morning, Lydia Goma, Interim Policy and Planning Director.
All right, welcome everyone. First, I just want to give a big thanks and kudos to the County Manager's Office, Health and Wellness Service Team, and the St. Paul Ramsey County Public Health Environmental and Health Division for putting together this presentation, and also for their commitment to developing a progressive and feasible countywide plan to respond to climate change and the increase in community resilience. As chair of this workshop, and on behalf of my colleagues, the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners, we really appreciate the opportunity to advance and support the county's climate action framework in alignment with our county's vision, mission, and goals. For today's presentation, we'd like to ask that questions be held off. There will be at different points in time of the presentation where we will allow for questions. So I just want to set the stage for that because I know that there are always questions. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the Health and Wellness Service Team, Deputy County Manager Hadid.
Thank you, Chair Zhang, and good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, County Manager. We appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning to provide you with an update to the Responding to Climate Change, Increasing Community Resilience Strategic Priority. The team here, along with partners and leaders within Ramsey County and external partners within community, have been busy providing expertise and lived experiences that will continue to inform and guide this work. And we're excited to share what we've been up to and what we're doing here with you today. If we could put up the slides, that would be fantastic. Thank you. So slide 2. This morning, you'll hear from my co-sponsor, Policy and Planning Director Lydia Gurma. Our Climate and Health Planner, Abby Phillips, will carry most of the update for you. And then one of our partners, Patrick Howell, from the Institute for Building Technology and Safety, or IBTS, is here to provide an update of the work we're doing together. Some of you know Patrick from your National Association of Counties work. I believe County Manager O'Connor and Patrick met prior to the beginning of COVID-19. If I have any of this story wrong, you both can correct me. To talk about how resilience can work within large institutions like ours. IBTS not only works within county governments, but with cities and state government in many different areas of climate resiliency, helping entities find gaps that cause vulnerabilities to well-being. Patrick will talk about how his work will complement the work we've done over the years and how it will blend together with what we're embarking on now. Our other team members have been working hard. They are right, I think, behind me over my shoulder. We have Director Holly from Public Health, Division Manager Ray Eden Frank and Jolie Woods from the strategic team, and then Energy and Sustainability Planner Mary Tkach and Climate Action Expert. You've been upgraded from intern to expert, Kevin Krantz. We want to thank Elizabeth Tolzman for her previous work as a co-sponsor these past 2 years, and Jen Hamrick, who helped to manage the strategic priority prior to Jolie. With that, I will hand it over to Lydia.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, County Manager O'Connor, this morning's board workshop will cover the topics listed in this agenda. We'll discuss previous county climate action work, which includes an overview of the energy and sustainability work led by the Energy Governance team, past plans that reference sustainability, and department-based initiatives culminating in the development of our current county-wide strategic priority focusing on responding to climate change and increasing community resilience. We'll also provide an overview of active projects, which includes descriptions of 5 interconnected engagement initiatives and a wide range of planning efforts. And finally, we'll share an outline of the process we're following to develop a climate action framework for the county, what's contained in our current draft, what our next steps are around this work, and how the Institute for Building Technology and Safety, or IBTS, will help assess this work. So in terms of the objectives for this board workshop, the objective is to provide you all with an update on all of the work that's happening within the strategic priority area, gather feedback, and prepare you for providing input on the draft climate action framework following this board workshop sometime in August, and Abby will share more about that later. We also request your support by encouraging your constituents to participate in finalizing the county's first climate action framework as more community engagement opportunities become available, and to also support our efforts as we identify external resources that help us achieve the goals outlined in the framework. Thank you. And I'm going to hand it off to Abby. That's going to take us into the heart of the presentation.
Thank you, Lydia. Good morning, Madam Chair, Board of Commissioners, and County Manager. Before we dive into our updates, I want to share a few definitions to ensure that we're all talking about the same thing. So when I say climate change, I'm talking about long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns. And in order to address climate change, there are essentially 2 courses of action we need to take. That includes mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation encompasses the actions that we take to reduce or prevent greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to climate change, and Commissioner Reinhardt mentioned anaerobic digestion earlier. That's one of those mitigative actions. Adaptation requires acknowledgement of the changes that we're already experiencing, like the extreme heat and poor air quality that we've seen this summer, and making adjustments necessary to continue to thrive in our new climate, such as sharing information and resources with residents to help them stay cool and reduce exposure to air quality. Our work over the last year aims to address climate justice, which is a subset of environmental justice that highlights the disparities between those contributing to climate change and those burdened by the effects of climate change. I'll refer to those communities as under-recognized and vulnerable individuals throughout this presentation. Nobody is immune to the impacts of climate change, but due to the compounding effects of racism and oppression, under-recognized racially and ethnically diverse communities of color in Ramsey County face more severe and frequent negative impacts on health, safety, and well-being in relation to climate change. Vulnerability to the impacts of climate change also increases for folks who experience or have a low income, experience housing instability, work outside, are immune compromised, have limited proficiency in English, and are older than 65 or younger than 10. All right. So we continue to see changes to our local climate, including milder winters, hotter summers, more extreme weather events, and longer allergy seasons. And these changes have a multitude of impacts on resident health, safety, and well-being, particularly on those under-recognized and vulnerable individuals and communities. Our current strategic priority builds off of the work of the former Energy Governance team, the Strategic Energy Plan, and the Resilience chapter of Ramsey County's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. The priority has guided the development of a comprehensive approach to respond to climate change through engagement, planning, and fund tracking. Our climate priority team is developing an intentional, strategic, accountable, and focused approach to implementing measurable and impactful climate mitigation and adaptation actions. In the coming slides, I'll provide an overview of the county's climate action work to date, including details on our recent engagement efforts, planning and fund tracking. And after that overview of past and current work, I'll pause for any questions you have before diving into the details of our climate action framework in development. Sorry, I'm trying to click past the slides in here. You got it. Thank you. All right. So over the last 15 years, various groups within the county have laid the foundation for our current strategic climate response. This work mainly focused on energy and sustainability by developing a county-wide energy governance team, setting county-wide greenhouse gas reduction goals in the 2017 to 2019 strategic energy plan that tracked to the state's goals. And I'll mention here that the state has recently upped their goals, so the county needs to now determine if we can reach those goals or reevaluate our strategic energy plan. There were also quite a few plans that identified climate mitigation and adaptation measures for the county to take, including but not limited to the 2018 Public Health Strategic Plan, 2019 Building Internal County Capacity for Climate Adaptation Plan, which was developed by a group of University of Minnesota students through the Resilient Communities Project, and the 2040 Comprehensive Plans Resilience chapter that I mentioned earlier. And there were also a number of department-based projects that weren't aligned underneath a county-wide priority, but did significantly advance the county's efforts to respond to climate change. And these included, but are definitely not limited to, Public Health's Climate Change Vulnerability Assessment, Soil and Water's Climate Summits, and Property Management's Stewardship Grant Program. The work spans efforts from 2011 up until now, and key successes include hiring Mary Tkach as the Energy and Sustainability Planner in 2011. Mary led and coordinated work related to energy conservation and reduction standards, including a cross-department sustainability gap analysis that turned into the county's first strategic energy plan. And between 2012 and 2018, the county prioritized and invested in various solar infrastructure and energy use reduction projects. In 2016, Public Health conducted a climate change vulnerability assessment, which identified geographical areas of higher vulnerability to the health impacts of climate change. And in 2018, the energy governance team was formed, creating a model for collaborating on resilience-focused work across departments. And it doesn't stop there. Key successes and actions from recent years include receiving a SolSmart designation in 2019 due to the prioritization of solar projects between 2012 and 2018. In 2019, Environmental Health briefly convened a resilience team to focus on expanding the county's capacity to promote climate adaptation strategies. Sadly, this work was paused in 2020 with so many folks redeployed to focus on the COVID-19 response. But in 2022, the county hired a climate and health planner, that's me, and over the last year and a half, with assistance from the rest of our climate priority team, I've focused on various community engagement efforts to understand community member priorities and build authentic partnerships. Planning efforts to guide ongoing engagement, update our vulnerability assessment, and create a cross-departmental climate action framework, and fund tracking because of the landslide of federal support becoming available for climate responses at the local government level. As you can see, the county has been setting goals and taking actions to address climate change for some time, and now we're using our climate action framework to align and prioritize all of this work across departments. You can go to the next slide. The process of developing a climate action framework also allows for an opportunity to identify gaps in our response in partnership with community. Through various engagement efforts over the last year, we've heard from over 300 residents and have incorporated their concerns and comments into the draft climate action framework goals that we'll discuss in more detail later in this presentation. This engagement process started with a series of listening sessions facilitated by a private consultant, Equity Strategies, last year. And through these sessions, community members highlighted the connections between climate change and racism, public transportation, food insecurity, access to natural open space, housing instability, inflation, and global migration. We then created an online survey to try to reach residents who were unable to participate in the listening sessions. And through this survey, residents communicated high levels of concern around poor air quality, extreme heat, and food insecurity. In June, we held a community conversation pictured on this slide. That's Kathy speaking to the group of participants. where 25 county staff facilitated in-depth group conversations with 78 residents focused on transportation, the natural environment, community resilience, clean energy, healthy lives, and the economy in order to understand experiences and responsibly guide revisions to the goals outlined in our climate action framework. In addition to these efforts, every month we write an article focused on one of the issues or concerns raised by community members through these efforts. The articles comprise a series called On Climate Justice, which is published in Environmental Health's Green Ramsey newsletter. Kevin Krantz, our climate action expert, recently wrote one focused on the mental health impacts of climate change and is currently drafting one focused on climate migration. And we're gearing up to launch a Climate Action Advisory Council comprised of community members who will meet with me on a regular basis to review progress guided by our climate action framework and, as relevant, offer guidance on how to adapt our work to better align with community needs. You can go to the next slide. I want to recognize that there are a ton of planning efforts in motion in departments across the county system that relate to the climate action framework, but for this presentation, we're focusing solely on planning efforts that are motivated specifically by our strategic priority to respond to climate change and increase community resilience. Over the last year, we worked with 3 groups of University of Minnesota students through the Resilient Communities Project to develop an ongoing, iterative, and inclusive climate action engagement plan and a template for conducting departmental climate action gap analyses to highlight opportunity areas for advancing our climate action work. With dedicated assistance from Tutu Fatukasi, who's not here but is one of our environmental health fellows, we've begun updating Public Health's 2016 Climate Change Vulnerability Assessment with current data in a more accessible format via the county's open data portal. And with support from 6 teams of cross-departmental topical experts, we're developing a climate action framework to prioritize and guide the county's cross-departmental climate response. Through this process, we're actively coordinating with staff focused on food security, career pathways, transportation planning, housing stability, economic development. Oh, I'm so sorry. Environmental conservation and emergency response and preparedness to ensure that the climate action framework aligns with and supports plans that they're developing or updating. And this month, a group of us will convene 4 times to review legislative action related to climate change from the past session and discuss how to leverage related opportunities within the county's climate response. Once our climate action framework is finalized, we'll finish drafting a climate action policy and request for board action component for your consideration. And that will help ensure that folks across the county system are aware of the climate justice implications of proposed projects. Next slide, please. In order to support all of this work, we're tracking new funding opportunities from state and federal sources. Our government relations team is managing a contract with Patricia Torres-Ray to highlight opportunities that advance the Federal Justice 40 initiative in climate-related funding, among other areas. We've also applied to collect the Department of Energy's Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant funds that were allocated earlier this year. And we've partnered with the Metropolitan Council to apply for the Environmental Protection Agency's Climate Pollution Reduction Planning Grant, which opens the door for us to compete for related implementation funds in 2024. In a moment, I'll shift gears to provide more information about our climate action framework in development. But with the overview I just provided, I want to pause for any questions you have about past or current climate response work. Are there any questions? All right.
I had one question.
Yes.
As related to Minnesota's goals,
Mm-hmm.
Are we required to follow or help them achieve that goal or anything, or do we just set our own goals? And I guess, how do we determine our goals?
Really good question. We are not required to follow suit with the state's plan, and I'll describe the process that we're moving through to create our own goals related to that plan in the next section of the presentation.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah,
Deputy.
Chair Zhang, I agree with what Abby said, but I think it's important to add, like, this is the first time we've seen a plan with this much depth in this area. It's exciting, and this is a great opportunity for us. And so to have a plan as a guide to help us as a system is a first in a very long time. So, and that's what Abby will describe in a little bit. So this is, it hasn't happened in this way. In most of our careers working with the state, there's always lots of good intentions. There's lots of work that happens in specific areas of state departments, county departments, but nothing that has come together in this way. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's great. And then I guess just my other question is, this is just our goals, like us as a county, right? Like we're not like mandating other like cities or businesses or anything, right?
Yes, that's right. Although, Commissioner, do you want to speak to this?
I was just going to say, Madam Chair, and on behalf of Commissioner McGuire, who would say this if she could unmute, Ramsey County League of Local Governments is taking this same policy on as a priority this year. So we may see some of our municipalities following suit, and we'll be working with them directly to help them achieve these goals as we set them for Ramsey County.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we can keep moving. So the Minnesota Climate Action Framework is a newly adopted statewide framework developed with lots of community engagement that we're using to align the county's climate action work with statewide best practices. The framework organizes climate mitigation and adaptation practices into the 6 goal areas listed here. And over the last 6 months, our climate priority team has integrated feedback from the community engagement initiatives that we've facilitated and findings from key partners into the state's framework. And we'll continue working with community members to refine this framework by way of the Climate Action Advisory Council, online feedback collection, and a second climate action community conversation planned for October. This summer, with support from the county manager and executive team, we convened 6 goal-specific cross-departmental work groups to further revise the framework with goals that are progressive and action steps that are feasible within the context of county operations. Here on the next slide, you can see a diagram. Is it working? There we go. Thank you. You can see a diagram of the 6 cross-departmental teams identified as key players in developing action items within each of the Climate Action Framework's goal areas. Representatives of the departments listed in dark blue within these groups have met twice now to review the state framework's action steps and integrated community feedback. The teams have collaboratively discussed a wide variety of resources, limitations, and considerations within each goal area to refine and add goals, prioritize action steps, and identify needed resources. And the teams will reconvene again in late August and early September to establish timelines for high priority actions and review proposed performance metrics related to each goal. The first goal in the framework focuses on clean transportation to connect all people through a safe, equitable, and sustainable transportation system. Action items in this goal area revolve around promoting multimodal transportation connections, maximizing resilience in transportation projects, and improving access to public transit. And that last item, the focus on increasing access to public transit, is a direct result of comments made from community in relation to this goal, revolving around improving accessibility and frequency of and safety within our public transit system. The second goal in our framework focuses on our natural environment, to manage our lands to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and support healthy ecosystems. This includes action items that would improve carbon storage in land, protect our plant and animal relatives, and support land management that increases social and economic resilience. Many of the community members' comments related to this goal focused on a need for education to help residents understand their role, what they can do to advance these goals, what resources we're providing to help them do that work alongside the county. The third goal focuses on building resilience in communities, or supporting communities with resources to build more resilient futures for themselves. Action steps include updates to county communications and infrastructure that improve a community's ability to withstand extreme weather, expansion of our urban tree canopy and natural resources within the county, and improvements related to resilience within our built environment and economy. Through engagement efforts, community members highlighted the interconnectivity of building resilient communities with all of the other goal areas in this framework by improving transportation, addressing food insecurity and mental health concerns, promoting green career pathways. And all of these connections led to us creating a chart that highlights the relationship between each goal with each of the other 5 goals within our climate action framework. The next goal focuses on investments in infrastructure that will support living wage jobs and careers, as well as promote clean energy and energy reduction to contribute to stabilizing the climate. Action items revolve around supporting the state's transition to 100% carbon-free electricity, reducing greenhouse gas emissions in county buildings, and promoting climate-smart design and construction practices. Through community engagement, residents highlighted the complexity of how promoting energy efficiency resources for building owners could increase disparities in wealth building between landowners and renters, and asked that the county consider what role we might play in equitably promoting clean and efficient energy resources so that all income levels benefit from these programs. This led us to develop an action item promoting weatherization of tenant-occupied buildings to reduce energy burden on renters. The next goal area focuses on protecting the mental and physical health and well-being of county residents and visitors in the face of climate change. Action items focused on protecting community from the direct and indirect health impacts of climate change and on bolstering public health resources to help vulnerable and under-recognized communities plan for and adapt to the health impacts of climate change. In conversation with community, we heard concerns around the changes we're experiencing this summer in air quality, a need for resources to be provided to low-income residents to help improve air quality in their homes, and concern over the mental health impacts of climate change, particularly for youth. Residents want to see youth engaged in planning climate responses so that the systems we develop yield the future with the results that they want to see. And the last goal in the document focuses on building an economy that addresses climate change, supports nature, and creates equitable opportunities for people by leading in clean energy innovation within the county and promoting and expanding green career pathways. In the community conversation this June, residents shared that they're very concerned with reducing disparities in wealth building opportunities through all of the funding available to support climate responses. They want to see the county focused on providing or promoting climate response resources that strategically benefit low-income, under-recognized, and vulnerable communities. These concerns support action items within the climate action framework that align the climate response opportunities with some of the work that career pathways and community economic development already have underway. Before Patrick and I describe the next steps in our framework development process, do any of you have questions about the 6 goals I just described?
Any questions? Yep, Commissioner Frelem.
Just one. You mentioned at one point talking about connecting residents to the resources we offer. Are we also connecting them to residents available to them in the community that aren't Ramsey County direct? Like for the land one, I know our watershed districts will give grants to convert and mitigate property into natural environments, lawns to legumes. Are tenants eligible to get like home energy audits because they'll replace all your light bulbs for you for free, especially if you're income eligible? I guess, are we doing that connecting as well?
We will be. Okay. Currently, great question, Commissioner. Currently, we are highlighting resources like that through the On Climate Justice articles we write every month. And through the process of developing this climate action framework, we're identifying partners in community who provide additional resources or should be engaged in implementing activities.
Yep, Commissioner Reinhardt.
Yes, I want to highlight the healthy lives in communities and protecting the mental and physical health and well-being of county residents and visitors. I think sometimes this is one that is overlooked because it does have an impact, both physiologically and psychologically. But I think that it's something that, when we think about climate change, and especially depending on where you are, what age group you're in, what you've experienced in the past, or what you see into the future, that makes a difference as well. But I think that it's something that again, we need to really acknowledge, I guess that's what I'm looking for, acknowledge that that makes a difference. It seems overwhelming to people. It is, in many ways, overwhelming because it's the climate. You know, if you don't do something about this, we won't have water, we won't have air, we won't be able to sustain human life. And so, and we need to make change, and we've heard it for quite some time now that we need to make change, and we need to make it now. And so the urgency of that, and for people, especially people that don't have the background, don't necessarily feel like they are empowered to do what they need to do, to be a part of it, rather than, oh, it's all on my back. And so I think there's many aspects of this that hit on this area where people want to do the right thing, but they don't know what that is, and so the resources that are out there are going to be really important. But I was glad to see this from both the state and obviously within the Ramsey County plan, because it's something that I think is overlooked quite often. And so we want to empower people. We want to help them understand what this is, what it isn't, what they can do, and how they can participate in all aspects of this.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner.
And I think especially for the underrepresented groups, the most vulnerable groups, it's even more important.
Absolutely, and you're spot on with a lot of the comments that we've heard through community engagement, that folks want to know more. They want to understand how climate change is affecting them personally, their families, and their communities, and what resources already exist to make change, to develop more resilient futures for themselves.
Well, and I do think that there are many resources out there. That's one thing that I've noticed. There's, whether it's elders or it's in a community garden area, I mean, there's so many different organizations that are working on this. And again, it can be overwhelming, but I think it's important that we, as a county, try to make sure that whatever you need in your neighborhood, you're able to access it. It may not be through the county, it may be through another resource that's out there.
Yep, absolutely. Any other questions, comments? I just want to add on to that too, that I appreciate just the engagement and also listening to and identifying different groups, including renters in that, because you know, with renters, like, you know, the property is not theirs, right? So like they can't make some of those changes, and that we have been thinking about that. I also want to lift up about, like, for natural disasters, for the resilient community slide for natural disasters, how you know, low-income renters and homeowners may oftentimes not have insurance or would be underinsured for natural disasters. And I believe, like, that's a piece where it's really difficult to sift through the information that's out there, and also about, like, people getting advice about, you know, am I covered enough, right? Am I insuring my property enough so that I can withstand these natural disasters too? So those are just some of the things that I would recommend including, and also in future engagements that we keep track of whether folks are renters or homeowners too, or like income. I think that would be a good way to determine how we're getting information from folks.
That's a great idea. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yep. And then the other one is about our tree canopy. Well, and then I also want to just say I'm really glad that all these departments are coming together to work on this plan, because I asked about our tree canopy policy too, just because in the city of St. Paul, a lot of the small trees, they're dying. And that's because, like, our policy is basically, it's the individual property owner who, like, helps to maintain it. If it's on a boulevard or like a certain stretch or in the parks, the city will come water it, or their contractors will. But sometimes if neighbors individually ask for it and they don't maintain it, the tree dies. And trees are just very vulnerable in those first few years. So I did ask about, like, a tree canopy policy on the east side. I think I'm getting a whole stretch, like, from Minnehaha, from like East 7th Street all the way to, like, through Maplewood, that they're going to reconstruct and take down. So that's a big loss to a community and very impactful. So that's why I just wanted to say, like, I'm glad we're working together to address that.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner. And just for your information, as part of the update to the climate change vulnerability assessment, we are looking at current tree canopy data to identify areas that are experiencing higher heat severity or extreme heat and urban heat island effect due to a lack of tree canopy. And one of the action items in the framework right now is to work with partnering agencies to expand tree canopy in planting, maintenance, kind of all of the aspects of tree care that are needed to increase that canopy cover.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Okay, we'll keep moving. So the next slide details the proposed next steps in our Climate Action Framework Development Plan, and we've highlighted items where we intend to request your participation to some degree. Part of the reason we're meeting with you today is to ask for your support sharing the Climate Action Advisory Council interest form with vulnerable and under-recognized constituents in your districts by or before August 16th. And you'll see a link to this form in 2 slides. We're also here to introduce you to our contact with the Institute for Building Technology and Safety and describe what you can expect from them, in relation to the Climate Action Framework development process. And on the next slide, Patrick will describe the details of their work. But before we get into the details of IBTS's work, I'll highlight that we're holding another community conversation in October to share the draft framework with community for more feedback. And as soon as we've confirmed the venue and date, we'll share that event invitation with you so that you can pass it on to under-recognized and vulnerable constituents in your districts. And in December, after integrating feedback from the October event and finalizing performance metrics with the cross-departmental goal review teams, we intend to publish a final draft of this framework so that in 2024, we can move forward with our high priority actions. With that, Patrick Howell from IBTS will provide more information about their plans to advance equitable climate resilience in our framework.
Great. Thank you so much, Abby. And thank you, commissioners, for having me this morning. Again, my name is Patrick Howell, represent the Institute for Building Technology and Safety, or better known as IBTS. Want to first just give a very brief overview of IBTS so you have the context of who we are and how we approach this work. We'll then describe some of the work that we have done in the past and then how that past work is going to be applied here for the Climate Action Framework. So again, IBTS, we are a nonprofit organization with a board of directors that consists of elected and appointed public officials representing the state, county, and city levels of government, of which NACO is one, as Commissioner Reinhardt had previously mentioned. So this is really interesting in that then our work is really informed and guided by public sector officials, just like you all, so that we can then respond most appropriately to the needs of local governments. We do have our areas of expertise in disaster management and climate resilience, also in energy and sustainability, as well as the name would suggest, building technology and safety. So primarily building regulations, building energy efficiency would certainly be an area of expertise for us as well. Several years ago, we had developed a climate and disaster resilience assessment and planning tool that we had called CRAFT. CRAFT is an acronym for Community Resilience Assessment Framework and Tools. At the time, this tool was largely developed and deployed for natural disaster and emergency response. And within this tool, we had a series of indicators and a very structured methodology by which we could assess the readiness of any given community to respond to natural disasters or other emergencies. After a visit and a conversation here in Ramsey County back in 2019, we recognized that we ourselves as an organization could be doing a better job of centering humans and centering equity in this work related to natural disaster preparedness and climate resilience. We visited here at Ramsey County, had several conversations with staff at the time and some of your elected officials, and were really impressed and inspired by the work that you all have done to integrate equity into every aspect of your operations, both internally facing as well as your externally facing services. We took that inspiration and then endeavored to modify our CRAFT tool so that, again, it is more human-centric so that it has that equity focus. After nearly 3 years of research, of engagement with over 200 other local governments, we're proud to say that we now have a set of best practices that we have learned to be able to best integrate these components of equity into climate resilience and disaster management. And so it is this tool and this methodology in which we are going to apply to complement the climate action framework development process. Ways that we're going to do that is primarily be able to take an independent and third-party look at what all of the policies, the initiatives, the projects that you have done to date, be able to identify what perhaps some of the barriers or gaps were to implementation there, of course what some of the successes are also that you've had that we can build upon, and to run that through our craft framework and our craft assessment methodology. In so doing, that is going to include extensive desk research on IBTS's part, again, to review all those documents and past projects. But it's also going to involve a lot of direct engagement with you all, with county staff, and with other stakeholders that are involved in the process. This might be in the form of one-to-one interviews. It could be small group discussions. It could be larger facilitated workshops, depending on what the needs are at the given phase of the climate action framework development process. So with that, then we will then develop a series of recommendations, again, based off the best practices that we had discovered through the CRAFT ECR being equitable climate resilience development process. We'll then propose those back to you all for input, for feedback, for validation. We'll refine those recommendations to ensure that they are both realistic and feasible, and that they are, in fact, complementary and not contrary to the goals and objectives of the county.
Thank you, Patrick. And I'll just add to that we plan to reach out to each of your aides to set up one-on-ones so that you can provide more details on the climate action framework draft via IBTS's work.
Any other questions? No? Okay.
All right.
Madam Chair.
Oh, yes, Commissioner Reinhardt.
Because of my position as chair of the IBTS board, I know that there was a grant that was provided, and Patrick, if you could talk a little bit about that, because this equitable climate resilience was something that is relatively new, and trying to really, again, I mean, just like we do in Ramsey County, everything is people-focused and what is the outcome. But it was studied in a couple of different communities, and so it's recently being rolled out within the last year. And so if you could give a little bit of background on how this tool was developed, Patrick, I think it would help to see how it works here. So we are the first county that is actually taking this ECR portion of the craft to implement and really make a difference, especially for underserved communities. And so it's something that is different than what others are doing. And I don't know that that would be obvious if you weren't as involved in it as I am.
Yeah, well, thank you, Commissioner Reinhardt, for lifting that up. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Reinhardt. Happy to give a little bit more background on the work. Again, we had a foundation to build off of. That's primarily our 40 years of experience working with cities and with counties on issues like this. And then again, having developed the original CRAFT tool and program that was focused on that disaster management, emergency management piece. But to further develop those tools and to be able to have a greater impact in communities related to equity and how communities are responding to this intersection of equity and climate resilience, we approached the Kresge Foundation, and they generously provide us a grant in partnership with the National League of Cities as well as the National Forum of Black Public Administrators. So we had them to really work with and to help guide our work. We also convened an expert advisory panel of 23 different experts across various disciplines, across different sectors, public sector, private sector, academia. We had social scientists, we had climate scientists, we had public administrators sitting on this advisory board. Again, so that we understand the right questions to ask, what the major challenges are in this field, and then how this tool could best respond to that. In addition to that, we then went out and we surveyed over 200 other cities and local governments so that we can better understand what are the day-to-day realities of trying to address this complex intersection of social equity and climate resilience. included in this survey, depending on it used skip logic, and so depending on how you may have answered it, it could have been up to 100 questions. It could have been as few as 5, depending on how you're answering the various questions. And so this gave us a very rich insight into what those, again, on-the-ground realities are for local governments that are trying to address this. What have been some of the obstacles, what have been some of the challenges as an organization, but also externally within your constituents and within your community. But of course, again, what have been some of those successes? What are some of the areas that we could really learn from and continue to build upon? So with 200 different cities providing that information, we're able to then translate that into this set of best practices, as well as some of the major common barriers or gaps or obstacles that communities were facing trying to develop this. So we captured that in this new CRAFT ECR, and ECR being Equitable Climate Resilience Tool. We then piloted this tool in 3 different communities. This was Orlando, Florida, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and San Leandro, California. One, so that we could verify proof of concept that this is going to be a valuable tool and a valuable assessment that's going to help communities advance their work and advance their impact related to equity and climate resilience. And to, again, have another round of feedback and input from communities that would actually be on the front lines doing this type of work. As Commissioner Reinhardt pointed out, those were 3 cities, so this will be the first engagement where we're really using it for the county level. I think interestingly, however, though, it was developed with cities, and that's primarily driven by the funder. The Kresge Foundation tends to fund projects that are directed towards cities and large urban areas. But the applications are broad and certainly applicable here for counties as well. And working with Abby and the greater team, we've been able to fine-tune the CRAFT ECR approach and methodology so that it truly is tailored and it's going to be the best fit here for Ramsey County as well.
Oh, that's great.
Commissioner Martinson?
Yes, thank you. I'm curious as to, once we've kind of do this framework and assessment, is there, is the next step around identifying policy changes that need to take place to make sure that we do it? And then it sounds scary, but is there any way to put, dollar amounts and costs for some of these initiatives so that we can start planning for, whether it's tree canopy policy and cost projections? Is there a way to do that as part of the tool?
So the first question about the recommendations for various policies, projects, or initiatives, that's certainly going to be a part of the assessment process. The first part is the assessment itself to better understand what are our existing conditions versus where do we want to go, and so what types of policies, projects, or initiatives might help us get there. So putting those forth is going to be a part of the work that we're doing. As it relates to kind of the costs of various projects or policies, that's not at the moment included within our scope of work, though would be happy to defer to Abby or others if you have any more thoughts there.
One of the resources that we requested they assemble as part of their recommendations is to help identify funding opportunities to advance this work. And many of the action steps within the draft climate action framework call for planning efforts to figure out what those budgets are associated with projects that need a little bit more detailed thought before we can actually take action. Yeah. So I'd say in the coming year, we'll be able to provide more of those numbers with a realistic perspective.
That's great. Yeah. Do you have a sense, and maybe I missed it in an earlier slide, but like how long you think this is going to take before we have kind of a plan that we can, start implementing?
Yeah, so we intend to have the framework published by the end of this year. And then we'll move forward with high priority actions within the framework in 2024.
Excellent, thanks.
That's great. Any other questions or comments?
My only comment is this is really exciting. Thank you for taking it. We've been pushing it for a long time. It's so great work. You came on board, and I think you did everything virtually for their first year here. So a lot of great work happening.
Thank you.
Just really appreciate the effort and the work of the whole team and all the sub-teams that are working on this priority.
Thank you.
All right.
There's a few areas where we do need your work, or your help and work at this point. If you go to the next slide, the interest form on our climate action webpage is live. You can either share the link or you can snap the QR code and share that out with everyone in your community. And again, with an emphasis on people who suffer from the current effects of climate change. People with chronic conditions like asthma, we've spoken about, we've talked about vulnerable, people who are vulnerable to extreme heat and weather events, people who are under-recognized individuals in your district. They don't always show up to events like this. We want to make sure that we are connecting with people in our communities, Black, Brown, American Indian, lower income renters, older adults. Let's make sure also that we're reaching as many people as possible by August 16th so that we can invite them to the first group meeting in September. And then, as Abby stated, we will work with you and your teams to set up one-on-ones with both Patrick from IBTS to review the draft equitable climate resilience work and the climate action framework in greater detail, so you're very familiar with what both the state has guidance on and then where those connections land here within Ramsey County, and want your input too as to what you're doing, what you're hearing, the work that you're doing outside of this space. So please stay tuned for those meeting invitations. And then lastly, we request your continued support to Commissioner Martinson's funding question, funding and acquiring the resources identified by both the IBTS and the Climate Action Framework Development Team when we share the finalized framework and the ECR assessment with you in December. We know that there's $49 million in available funds from our state government to help us accomplish some of this work. There'll be a lot of work throughout our county system within departments, depending on where those, the buckets of funding will be. And we'll work together as a part of the strategic priority team as well as our legislative action team to ensure that we're applying for everything we can apply for our community. I'm going to hand it over to Lydia.
All right, Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you. And with that, we will entertain any additional questions that you have. If there's any information or data we don't have in hand, we'll make sure to follow up.
Commissioner Martinson?
Yeah, I just would say I would add to your list of folks that either get this or be engaged, and I know that Jenna Rourke is here, but to make sure our Ramsey County delegation of elected officials get it, because that'll help with buy-in as we move forward for funding and policy changes in the future. So just want to make sure that's on our list.
And you want them to receive the Climate Action Framework or the invitation to participate in the Climate Action Advisory Council?
I think both.
Both, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Reinhardt?
Madam Chair, because if you get it to them, they can get it to the people within their communities, so it's a way to spread the word on that. Okay. And I do think that, again, highlighting the equitable climate resilience, this is a brand new tool. And so I think a lot of times people think that it's automatically part of the equation, and this is something that we're doing that is really above and beyond. And it's one of the reasons I'm very excited about the Climate Action Plan and the equity portion of that as well. I think we're going to end up with a premier product that we can actually get out there and put in the hands of individuals, because that's what it comes down to, going all the way back to the people feel overwhelmed by it.
Right.
Well, if we do this right, we'll give them the tools and the information they need to make the small changes that add up to big changes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to just also add about the advisory committee that we are making sure that that's diverse and reflective of our diverse communities. Because I know that that's always a barrier for folks who are low income or folks who don't speak English, that there are barriers to participating. And also that in certain communities or cultural groups that like climate change, resilience, like those terms, there aren't any words that could be translated to that. So I just want to be aware of that. And also that we should be keeping track of those demographics about who gets to participate so that we can do intentional focus groups if we need to solicit that feedback, and that also having those strong relationships with the cultural communities will be very important to the success of this.
Thank you for bringing that up, Madam Chair. I still need to do the work of looking at all of the assessment measures that have been used for selecting advisory council members for other councils that the county runs. I'll do that in the coming weeks. But just so you know, the interest form that you're sharing to advertise this council is just an interest form. It's not an agreement to participate. So we'll be able to check back in with all of the folks who have expressed interest and ask questions about demographics and experience.
Perfect.
Sorry.
Before we go,
Yeah,
can I
go ahead.
Yeah.
Just responding, Chair Zhang, I think your point about language is important, not only for people who English is not their first language, but for people who speak English. I think Commissioner Reinhardt even spoke about people don't speak the resilience language, the climate change language, but they understand when their apartment floods. They understand that their child has asthma. They understand that they have been suffering through 10 days of 100-degree weather and they don't have air conditioning and they're in the hospital. And so we learned that a lot from the first set of engagement that was done, of how people fully understand what it means to be resilient in community. But the language that we use, the language that the institutions use, is not language that translates very well for anyone. So I appreciate you naming that language piece as well as giving the suggestion of having focus groups for people who can't make it to some of these larger events, and we can adapt and make that happen.
Perfect, thank you. Commissioner Martin.
I just had a clarifying question because you mentioned that this is an interest form and not an agreement to participate. Are we limiting the number of participants? I worry about if we have a lot of interest and then we say, well, we don't need you, right? And how do we frame that out? Or does it just help you dictate how many groups you have?
That's a really good question. We should update. I'll work with our communications team to update our website to reflect some of the logistics of this council. I'm envisioning that we could actively engage with 20 folks on kind of a rolling, reoccurring basis. So after a year or two of participating in this council, folks would step down and we would open up an invitation for other community members to step in and participate.
Okay. So then does it become one of our standing advisory boards and committees? Maybe that's a policy discussion later, but something to think about as we appoint those folks as a board.
Seems like it should be.
Yeah. So we have a model for that already when we get further along.
Great.
Well,
Commissioner Reinhardt.
in making it a formal part of what we do, which I think it needs to be, also then sets the parameters on how people apply, and we go through the process to make sure that we get the most diverse group and opinions and discussion items that we possibly can. So I think that that makes a lot of sense to put it through our normal process. Because, yeah, you don't want to have people thinking that they're signing up and not that you can't participate in what's happening with the group, but to be an actual member of that group. We just need to make sure that it's got the diversity that we need.
Absolutely, that makes sense.
Yep. Commissioner Moran.
As I continue to learn these processes, what is the normal process?
I don't know.
I can help with that.
Okay.
It's through the clerk, the chief clerk for the county. We have a number of advisory boards with different rules. Some of them are done by statute. But anyhow, so the normal process is that we find out, okay, what are the openings on certain boards? And most of them are obviously already established. So we'd have to establish this one and decide how many people, what areas, what are we looking for. So you can designate certain ones, like with Workforce Solutions. You want to have people that live or work in Ramsey County in diverse areas. So there's criteria that goes along with it. What are you really looking for? And then what happens is we solicit the information. The chief clerk puts together a series of interviews. And generally speaking, when we do that, there's 3 commissioners that are on that. And we do a quick 15-minute interviews with each. And then we make recommendations to the full board on who should be appointed. or reappointed. This being new, it's a little bit different than that because we have to decide all of those things. But it's a process that makes sure that we get the representative groups, because clearly you can't have everybody on every committee, but it's, I think it's worked out to be a good process. It used to be much more, I don't even know what the right word is. No, it was just kind of, okay, well, what happened there? Yeah. And so we made it a very concerted effort to make sure that we were fully vetting and really getting people in so that they knew that when they became part of an advisory board or a committee, that they had an action associated with that. It wasn't just being appointed. Do you really want to make an impact on this? And with climate resilience, I think that that is going to be especially important because of especially the timing of it.
Yeah. Great. Commissioner Frelum?
Commissioner Moran, you and Commissioner Zhang and I did a very abbreviated process that Commissioner Reinhardt just described for our Parks Board appointment, and we're embarking on a robust round of appointments in the next couple of weeks. So you'll see a bunch of meetings coming up. I think we start, it's either next week or the week after with, it's the 14th. We have many interviews with our community members to make the next round of recommendations for appointments.
In the Park Board?
Not just Park Board, multiple.
Multiple.
Not the Climate Board, but our Capital Improvement Advisory, Capital Region Watershed District, Community Health Services Advisory Committee, Personnel Review Board, lots and lots of different interviews that another Parks and Rec Commission interviews. So we'll be interviewing, looks like 24 people for various board appointments, starting on the 14th.
It's kind of like speed dating. Not that I ever did that,
So,
but
just to bring us back to this workshop,
Yes,
so thanks, we curved off, but my suggestion was for in the future, I think your plan here about how you're doing it is the right plan, but as we finalize a plan, if we think about this being of standing priority, that could be the approach. I just wanted to clarify that, not to supplant what you've already planned, but for future planning purposes.
yes.
Lydia, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add on to what was said. Ramsey County is always trying to improve the ways that we engage community, identifying barriers to engagement. You've mentioned some of them, Madam Chair, but this is a pilot. So we want to see how well this works, make improvements as we think about consistent engagement and what that looks like, and how community wants to engage around this work with us. So we don't want to prescribe how that should look in the future, but this is a great opportunity to better understand how we should do it.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
Thank you.
Madam Chair, so can I just close by saying that is good, and thank everyone for sharing. I think, knowing what that process looked like, but also hearing that, Ramsey County is always working to improve processes and making sure that we are very inclusive of what engagement looked like, being very intentional about having a very diverse group of voices who are bringing their insight and experience and expertise to the table is important. And, I have definitely seen Ramsey County continue to make equity and diversity and inclusion and reaching out to community to be a part of the process. But I also think it's really important for community to know that process, right? It's about building that trust with community so that when they are a part of a board, they have clear expectations of what that looks like, right? And why they're there. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Any closing comments from the presenters or anything?
Thank you so much for taking the time to hear this update and supporting this work. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Thank you all very much. Meeting adjourned.